I'll never forget my reaction to the George Floyd video. I was at the kitchen table at my family's home in Monroe, Louisiana, after my life in Tunisia came to an abrupt end after COVID lockdowns made living there untenable. I had many thoughts and feelings as I watched the police officer press his knee in the neck of handcuffed George until life was extinguished from his eyes. But my immediate response was a mix of apathy and righteous vindication. The apathy came from a lifetime of witnessing, hearing, and reading about unjustified deaths of black men under the heel of white power, and feeling like this would be another tally on the board. Justice would not be served. The righteous vindication, I'm ashamed to say, was from feeling unbelieved by people I'd encountered abroad who asked me why I left, quote unquote, my country, then looked at me incredulously when I explained the violent system of white supremacy in America that black folks still live under, and how that motivated me to emigrate. In retrospect, it's wicked to think that me posting the screenshot of Floyd's last moments on my WhatsApp feed with a callous caption was my way of telling everyone who doubted, I told you so, as if that would make me feel better or change their perspective of the shining city on a hill. I hope that my writings reach some understanding of truth, and with that goal in mind, I must practice radical honesty with myself, no matter how embarrassing or flawed the ink makes me out to be. I'd like to think that had the world not been locked down and obliged to be online, that Floyd's death would be an inflection point in not only American history, but the world's understanding of anti-blackness. However, the most likely truth is that the radical black grassroots, the anti-racist activist class, and the career politicians who lean left when convenient would have been the only ones campaigning for justice on behalf of George if the pandemic didn't make the world stop. It's very likely in an alternate universe, Derek Chauvin's case went the way of George Zimmerman's acquittal. The frustratingly cyclical rinse and repeat of black blood staining uncuffed hands whose wrist rarely ever gets slapped is enough to make the system's most ardent critic into a cynic. One of the many psychological terrors of being black in a white supremacist world is the constant barrage of visuals and messages demonstrating that one can be exterminated with a low possibility that those responsible will be held to account if they fall under the protection of the dominant society. It can all be so taxing, vexing, distressing, numbing, feeling like death is always coming. With the noose ever present, I wouldn't blame anyone closing their eyes while walking through life on the gallows. I'm more than certain there was a cross-section of black people who watched the video and were unmoved, and black people who didn't watch but were moved. For one reason or another, it's understandable to fast from exposure to pornographic black death. That's what I did for the Sonya murder. By the time this is published, you'll have assuredly heard about the murder of Sonya already, a black woman executed by police gunfire in her own home after calling 911 when she suspected an intruder was there. I won't recount the specifics of the case because news outlets are covering this national tragedy aggressively around the clock due to how heinous the murder was, as shown on one of the two officers' body cam. What I want to discuss, or rather debate with myself and the audience, are several things. Firstly, why did I feel so much inner guilt for not reading up on, instantly watching the video of, and or talking about Sonya's murder? Should I have felt this shame at all? Secondly, when does caring for our people and being cognizant of the current events that highlight our present struggle, no matter how tragic or traumatic they may be, end? And when does self-preservation of our own psyche begin? Thirdly, and I believe this will all tie together, how does the possible future reality of America having its first female and second ostensibly black president coincide with the present truth that black women in America exist in a world that's hostile to their very beings? I hope by practicing radical truth-telling while examining myself and the world around me, I can come to an honest answer. Of course, before continuing, I'll state here boldly and clearly that what happened to Sister Sonya was abhorrently wrong, and the fault of the murder rests just as much on the gun culture and ownership rates in America that make civilians and law enforcement on edge, even though Sonya was only armed with a pot of water, just as much as it does with how the disregard for black life is inculcated in American police forces and U.S. society at large. Some things must really change, and those are America's gun laws and culture and systemic anti-blackness which is practiced institutionally and socially. Now, to some degree, I am a public figure. I have built a moderately sized platform on my channel by talking about and showing a variety of things: my travels, movie and music reviews, takes on politics, etc. Nevertheless, I have always centered everything I do on this space to the exploration of blackness in a world adverse to it, the ideological fight against white supremacy, and the black intellectual, philosophical, and sociological tradition. I think capitalist marketers would say I've quote-unquote built my brand around talking about black issues, as much as saying I, an individual, am no different than a commodity like Amiri jeans, Crocs, or Old Spice makes me want to vomit. I would hope my name and face would be synonymous with defending black life, expression, thought, history, and people. However, I must be true to self and say despite my efforts to stay abreast of and report on the momentous occurrences related to black life in my homeland and abroad, I have yet to garner a like-minded following or consistent engagement with my work. If past performance is an indicator, this piece I've spent hours penning will not crack triple-digit clicks and will get 0 comments. That's fine by me because I would do this labor with or without the engagement or accolades. But I have to be real with the man in the mirror and ask him, would he be quicker to engage with Sonya's tragedy if making content was greatly incentivized? To go even further, what does it say about our world that I would even ask that question? What are the implications, better yet consequences, of an industry created by amateur journalist commentators who want to, at best, report on injustice in the world while also having financial motives? Is Sonya's life meant just to be another hashtag that trends to fuel the click economy of, hopefully well-meaning, content creators? These questions are not meant to denigrate the thousands of writers, bloggers, pundits, and pontificators out there speaking up on behalf of the Massey family to appeal for justice. Yet they are questions I asked myself whose answers made me so uneasy that I chose not to say anything at all. After seeing the murder of a black military member in Florida by a cop this year, I was mentally and emotionally not ready to see a cold-blooded killing on camera again in 2024 of someone who looked like me by someone who'd likely get off. Nonetheless, I watched the Sonya Massey video eventually. Bracing myself for the worst, I fast-forwarded what had to be a video over 40 minutes long to around the 15 to 20 minute mark. I saw the part when she was sitting on the couch while 2 large, heavily tattooed and armored white men towered over her in her living room alone. My mind instantly thought of the intro to Paris's song, Coffee, Donuts, and Death. The 2 Caucasian cops ordered her to go to the kitchen to take a boiling pot of water off the stove. It was clear from how she was talking and gesturing that she was mentally unwell. While separated from the cops with a large kitchen counter and what looked like a safe distance between them, heated words were exchanged where one cop threatened her life with an expletive, and Sonya's final words were, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus," before a bullet went between her eyes. The only thing that made the silence of the officers after the execution more disturbing was that I watched this modern lynching in 1080p on YouTube. It's hard to describe exactly how I felt after watching it, but it was similar to my initial feelings to the Floyd tape. Numb, unsurprised, righteous vindication, because I broadcast all the time that America is lethal towards black life. And my God, did I feel terribly guilty for that and ashamed. I take no joy in being right because I'd rather be wrong. But should I feel that? Because what can I do? Should I make a video that will get 40 views and loads of comments from racist right-wingers who will argue that she deserved to die? I've received death threats, racial abuse, and attacks on my intelligence for voicing calls for justice for situations similar to Sonya's. Is a part of the guilt I feel for not talking about it because deep down, cowardice in the face of anonymous bigots who will write the most wicked words imaginable has taken hold of me? Once again, I would do my work no matter what. I am not living in fear of my life, and I actively deplatform haters, but it does get tiring seeing the same story play out post-publishing. Maybe all this comes down to me becoming a victim of an emotion I have been critical of others having, indifference. Maybe deep down, I just feel like there was nothing more that I can do because my words go unheeded and most of my regular commentators are the type of black men to downplay being called to their face. Maybe the shame and guilt was twofold: the guilt of feeling helpless in the face of evil, and the shame of not attracting an audience of like-minded souls who would rally around the cause to strategize how to produce justice. Maybe I'm asking too much of myself and the world around me. Maybe I'm not asking enough and I need to work harder. But what I do know is that I need to let go of those negative emotions and not be so hard on myself. I'm tired of seeing the murder porn. I will always care for and fight for our people with my words in this ideological war. But I do not need to see every casualty on the battlefield to know that the battle isn't done. This segues into the next part: protecting the psyche under permanent mental terror. I believe exposure to violence on video or photograph can be positive, neutral, or negative. It can be positive in that it can humanize an issue by making us closer connected to victims of catastrophe or injustice. It can be neutral in that it doesn't move us to sympathize with others, even if it stirs emotions of disgust or horror. It can be negative in that it can make some callous in the face of evil, or even worse, cause some to revel in the sight of misfortune falling on others. An example of positive violence exposure could be Emmett Till's open casket, which helped galvanize the civil rights movement, or modern videos floating around online showing Palestinian children in Gaza mutilated by Israeli weapons, which motivates activists to protest for a ceasefire and changes public perception against the genocidal Zionist. An example of neutral violence exposure could be a fictional horror slasher film that might make you squeamish but no more socially aware, or clips on chaotic.com where horrific murders and accidents might make one feel revolted but no more empathetic. An example of negative violence exposure could be, I hate to say, all of the above, though it largely depends on the biases the viewer holds. An anti-black racist troll might make memes denigrating Emmett Till's pummeled skull. A rabid Zionist will excuse images of Gazan children with exposed organs. A nihilist will snicker at a brutal body horror film. A cynic will shrug at a wicked fatal car crash on Chaotic. Exposure to violence isn't the only thing in life that can have good, bad, and shades of gray in between, but it is something we must take into account when examining modern human life, where cameras are ever present and it's more likely someone would record Floyd's death or Rodney King's beating rather than intervene. Even with all this in mind, I still believe it is important for the revolutionary against white supremacy to have regular exposure to violent injustice because of its positive effects. Seeing body cam footage of fatal police encounters of unarmed black people, watching cell phone footage of neo-Nazis verbally and physically assaulting black pedestrians, and seeing surveillance camera captured clips of any Caucasian-caused calamity befalling black life will refresh our vigor and morale to fight, even if the immediate effects are disgust or depression. But as my father used to always tell me, everything in moderation. Much like how I've stressed the importance of personal happiness when searching for places Black Americans wish to expatriate to, there has to be a balance between living out our ideals and objectives while maintaining personal safety. We should regularly expose ourselves to that which makes us angry and agitated so that we remember what we are up against, but we shouldn't overdo it by watching Black death pornography that it becomes rageful masturbation or numbing to our feelings. I believe everyone's tolerance is different, so for some, watching the snuff films of each of our unwitting martyrs on our march towards total liberation is possible for them. For others, just reading or hearing about the cases is enough. And for even fewer folks, I'd imagine that fire will remain in their bellies without ever watching one snippet. Those in the last group are true revolutionaries committed to the struggle because they have a deep understanding of the beast and his ways. I hope to be counted amongst them when the saints come marching, but I need a punch to the gut every now and then, like the Florida Airmen's murder film, to remind me of purpose. No matter which group you find yourself in, please remember we are fighting the dehumanizing forces of white supremacy, not to lose our humanity, but to liberate it. Let the last moments of our martyrs not scar or scare us into complacency, but motivate us to keep trudging through the trenches. If one so chooses not to watch the horror show or speak on it, but remains committed to the goal, let no guilt fall upon them from external or internal sources. Our minds are what we should protect at all cost. We should maintain maintain optimism no matter how bleak the day is, and that leads me now to the Kamala conundrum. That being, how do we contextualize the possibility of the first female president being a black woman while the vast majority of black women live under the threat of physical and psychological assault? I speak with caution as a man so as not to come across like I speak for black women. I only opine because I am extremely sympathetic to the plights of black and all women and try my best to align with radical feminism. I believe around the same time Sonya's murder happened, President Joe Biden announced he would not be seeking re-election, and his endorsement for Vice President Harris led to a surge of support for her from Democratic donors, the grassroots, and the political elite. This major news overshadowed the Sonya story in the media and swept me up in the hype as well. Similar to Obama's 2007 campaign, hers feels like a breakthrough moment in America where even those jaded by the political process see the chance to shatter a glass ceiling that has hung over America for far too long. Is there any merit or benefit of having black faces in high places? No, yes, and maybe. The answer is no if it's just a black person being in charge of leading the same white supremacist government to enact and enforce policies that maintain the status quo. Yes is the answer if that black person can help overhaul the system. Finally, maybe could be the answer if you believe that seeing a black face in such a high place on a global stage will strike a deafening blow against the widespread anti-black belief that it is impossible or improper for black people to hold such high levels of authority. As long as U.S. domestic and foreign policy remains the same, I'll be hypercritical of it regardless of who's in charge. However, as my experiences at home and abroad have shown me, anti-black views are pervasive, and a lot of them come from never seeing black people doing the things we say and know we can do. It wasn't that long ago that Tupac rapped, "Although it seems heaven sent, we ain't ready to have a black president." But as Kendrick Lamar quipped this year, sometimes you gotta pop out and show niggas. With all the societal disadvantages and hurdles black women have to overcome, Kamala's candidacy creates space for collective optimism for black people living vicariously through her. While we march and protest for justice for Sonya, we hold our breaths in unison to see if Kamala can pull off what has yet to ever be done. The break from the psychic terror of the present by having hope for a better future is nothing to be ashamed of. It's what makes us a people. It's what makes us human. Signing out for our people, Simon Hill.